Thanks so much, Andrew, and adventurers. Isn't it great to see our adventurers starting a club in our church? It's been many years since we had a Pathfinder club here in the church, and now we have adventurers, so that's just wonderful. Okay, so Pentecost again. You know, I don't know how long I'll preach for today because I've just written some notes out, so we'll see how it goes. But I wanted to share from just our amazing experience that we had in Papua New Guinea just recently with Andrew. And to be honest, I wish you all could have been there because it was just an amazing thing. Let me just show you here. I've just taken some screenshots here from a Facebook page that was called PNG for Christ News and Updates. And these are just different things that are happening around Papua New Guinea over the last couple of weeks. You know, wherever you turn in Papua New Guinea, there was just people lining up and getting baptised. And, you know, seeing what we saw over there is affirming for our Adventist message. It's affirming for our identity as Adventists. And while we were there, my wife Geraldine said, you know, seeing what we're seeing here, I feel sorry for Australia and New Zealand. I feel sorry that so many people here in Papua New Guinea are turning to God, and in Australia we don't see that. And, you know, as I was thinking about that, something that I've mentioned here before, that I heard in America just a few months ago regarding our Western civilizations. Comfort is our addiction. Is that true? Comfort is our addiction. Poor people, the poorer they are, it seems the more interested they are in God. And wealthy people, the more wealthy they are, it seems the less interested they are in God. And this is what we saw there in Papua New Guinea. After coming back, as I looked at, I was looking at the Facebook page here, something popped up that was from Australia. It was from a group called Youth for Christ Australia. And it was an advert where they were seeking donations, etc. And they were showing that hundreds of young people in Australia are coming to faith in Jesus. Hundreds. And they say, we haven't seen something like this for a long time. So who knows? Perhaps a change is coming. Perhaps a change is coming with the next generation. And sometimes it takes a generation or two for nationwide change to happen. Isn't that true? Last time there was a great revival here in Australia was when Billy Graham came through, right? What was that, the 1960s? 70s? Yeah, so, you know, as I began to think about this surreal experience that we had in Papua New Guinea, I began to think of this verse that Andrew just read in Revelation 18:1. After these things I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was illuminated with his glory. Not just Papua New Guinea, but the earth. The whole earth is illuminated with his glory. And I was wondering, what would it take to have a Pentecost experience here in Australia? Would we be ready if it happened here? What are the prerequisites for a Pentecost experience? I heard an illustration recently about a ship called the RMS Lusitiana that was sailing before World War I. And a certain art dealer in New York bought a ticket to go from New York to England to find some stock in his art shop. And he had a young man, a protege that he was training up. And he was going to send this young man across to Europe to scour around and look for products to bring back to America. But then as you know, Germany was building up and the war was going on, etc., World War One, America was not yet engaged at that stage in the war. And he said, look, I'm concerned about this ship going across, and I think I'm going to cancel the ticket because the Germans are giving indications that they may torpedo the boats. And so the young man said, look, I want to go. I know, I've been reading the newspapers, I want to go, and I have been preparing. And so the boss says, how have you been preparing? He says, well, I get in my bathtub and I fill it up with ice and I lie in the water. A lot of people do that these days, don't they? They pay a lot of money to go into an ice bath and feel refreshed, right? He says, I have managed to increase my times in the ice bath so I can now lie for 2 hours in the ice bath. He says, I'm preparing for in case the ship I'm on gets torpedoed and I end up in the cold waters of the northern Atlantic, that I can survive. I'm ready. Send me. Let me go. Well, the boss let him go. The ship sailed. The ship got torpedoed. More than 1,000 people lost their lives. But this young man survived. He survived for more than 5 hours in the cold oceans of the northern Atlantic. Preparation was his key. Preparation. And if we are to have a Pentecost experience, I believe preparation is the key. I think Andrew has already mentioned that Papua New Guinea was preparing for what just happened over the last few weeks for a number of years. We were actually meant to go in 2020, early 2020. I think it was April. But you all know what happened then. Everything got locked down, and so the whole thing had to be called off. So they have been quietly working away ever since then, preparing for the last number of years for what we have seen in Papua New Guinea. But lighting up the earth. After these things, I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority and power, and the earth is illuminated with his glory. A number of times in the book of Revelation, we see the repeat of the words glory, honour, and power, and it is in conjunction with God's creation, God's created beings worshipping the Lord. If you want to have a look in Revelation 4:11, we see 24 elders there, and it says that they cast their crowns and say, you are worthy, O Lord, to receive what? Glory and honour and power, for you created all things. In Revelation 5:12, and we see that all the angels and the heavenly creation say with a loud voice, worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive power and riches and wisdom and strength and honour and glory and blessing. You see the repetitive nature of the words there? In the next verse, Revelation 5:13, every creature which is in heaven and on earth says, blessing and honour and glory and power be to him who sits on the throne and to the Lamb forevermore. In Revelation 7 verse 12, we see that all the angels in heaven again and the heavenly beings say, amen, blessing and glory and wisdom, thanksgiving and honour and power and might be to our God forever and ever. You see over and over again these words. In Revelation 19:1, a great multitude now in heaven says, hallelujah. Salvation and glory and honour and power belong to our God. Friends, I believe that it's people, God's creation. It's us. We need to be the ones that glorify and honour God, and then by his grace, through his power, we can light up the world. Does that make sense? Just like the three angels' messages, you know, there wasn't three angels that kind of magically flew around the world. It was God's people sharing a message, right? People, you know, call it the second great awakening. the Millerite movement, the Advent movement. And so people, God's creations, are the ones that light up the world before the second coming. And this will be the time of a global Pentecost. When the church is ready, God will make it happen. And I believe that God has given us a little foretaste of what it's going to be like around the world at PNG for Christ. We had a small foretaste of what God is planning globally. In verse 2, we read, "And he cried mightily with a loud voice, Babylon the great is fallen, and has become a dwelling place of demons, a prison for every foul spirit, and a cage for every unclean and hated bird." The scriptures here in Revelation refer to Babylon as a confusion of religions, right? And we see a succession in Revelation chapter 4 of the four horsemen, right? Starting with the white horse, the pure church, and then going across to the red horse, the persecuted church, and then the black horse as apostasy begins to come into the church, and finally the pale horse representing death and a dead church. And so after all of that comes into the church, we're living in a time today where there is still confusion in the church. Even though we are living post-Reformation, we are living, 500 years ago, the Reformation began. And today we are living post-Reformation. But there's a call to come out of Babylon. And but we see that there is confusion around us. We could see that in Papua New Guinea too. Many different people from many different faiths in various places. As the meetings were going on, our friends from the Roman Church came past carrying Mary, trying to disrupt the meetings. But it only galvanized people to come and listen even more. We're told that as the churches that came earlier in the Reformation, as they reject the message of the first angel in Revelation 14 to worship the Creator, to come back to the Sabbath, etc. As they reject the first angel, they will go on to reject the second angel and then reject the third angel. And so that's why Revelation 18, that final call will be to come out of her, my people, because God has people across all faiths. Isn't that true? And so as people reject the Sabbath, what is the effect of that? They are willing to openly embrace evolution, aren't they? And so today we see that. A lot of the churches, Christian churches, are trying to merge faith and evolution. As they have rejected the Sabbath, one follows the other. The second coming, they reject the biblical understanding of the second coming, and they've accepted lock, stock and barrel across many in the evangelical world that there will be a secret rapture, or that there will be some 1,000 year of peace on earth, during the millennium, and that people will get a second chance, that Jesus will come back secretly, but those that are left behind get another chance. And so as they reject what the scriptures tell us, that what follows is an error in their understanding. They reject the sanctuary message that Adventists have brought into understanding. And so there is no urgency. There's no urgency in the message today. And lastly, they reject our understanding that we get from the Bible of the state of the dead. What happens when you die? And so what happens is New Age ideas start coming into the church. Spiritualism starts coming into the church. And that's why Revelation says that Babylon then becomes full of demons. Hard to imagine, isn't it? That Babylon, people who supposedly represent Christ, it says here, becomes a dwelling place of demons. And so in verse 3, we see there that all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. The kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich through the abundance of her luxury. There is global confusion. We see that everywhere today, isn't there? Global confusion in the media, in the social media, in the churches. And we see what we have been sharing for a long time, this church-state union coming back together. We see that ultimately the church will support the state in return for the state supporting the church. The two will go together. And, we've often wondered how it's all going to work, how there will be coercion across the whole earth. But we see that today, don't we? Big Brother is seeing everything that we do. They can see us from a satellite, can't they? They can listen. Everything you're saying on your phone, even if you're not using your phone. Everyone, just collecting data. We live in an age of data. And Big Brother is certainly ready to bring in the end time events. And so, lastly, verse 4 here, God calls his people to come out. Come out of her, my people, lest you share in her sins, lest you receive of her plagues. God has faithful people in all places that are caught up in confusion today. And what we saw in Papua New Guinea is that people from all walks of life were coming forward as we made calls. I found at my site, I'm actually very bad with numbers. When we started, I thought to myself, there's maybe like 300 people here, maybe 400 people. And Geraldine said to me, you need to think more like an evangelist. There's more people than that. You know how evangelists double count people sometimes? Well, I was undercounting over there. And one night, Geraldine had the security guards go around and count the people. They counted more than 1,200 people. And so I really, when you're not used to seeing large numbers of people, you just don't know. It's hard to estimate the number of people. But, as we made calls, people came forward. People from their villages, their towns that had been living in, they had been a certain denomination for 1, 2, 3 generations, because that's the missionaries that came there and that's how they come to know Christ, right? And so, they'd always been a certain faith. In the area that I was, it was mostly Lutheran folk. And also various Pentecostal groups, AOG, Revival groups, Foursquare, which I don't think we see much of Foursquare in Australia, do we? Maybe they've got some trendy names here in Australia, I'm not sure. But they were from all walks of life. There was atheists even. I had a guy come to me and he said, ever since I went to university, he was an anthropologist and he studied biology and stuff like that. He said, I learned all about evolution. I kind of gave up on God, but coming to your meetings has revived my faith in God. There was backslidden Adventists, people that had been Adventists but been away for many years, coming forward. There had been our bus driver was a guy that was born and grew up in an Adventist church. He said, I wanted to be baptised when I was in grade 4. But he said they said I was too young. And so he said after that, I kind of lost interest in the church and I left. And now he was baptised some 50 years later. 50 years later, and a life journey of ups and downs, married to 10 different wives along the way, but he still has his first wife. Polygamy is a thing over there, But the thing is, he had all these other wives along the way and he divorced them, got rid of them, but he's still got his very own original wife who was an Adventist, right? And his brother-in-law who's an elder in the church. He's been reaching out to this guy for many, many years. And he said before the program came along, he said, I went and I bought my brother-in-law some clothes. It seems to be a thing over there, you know, they buy clothes, they pray over the clothes. Did you have to do that, Andrew? They got me to pray over their clothes that their choir was going to wear, you know. But he prays over the clothes. He took these clothes to his brother-in-law and he says, come, you're coming to this meeting. Dragged him along to the meetings and the rest is history, you know. The guy changed his life around. God is calling his people and, you know, I'm just showing a few different pictures here. This was on one of the Sabbaths where we had a baptism. What I tried to do is, they had many people that were already prepared for baptism before we got there. And so I said, look, rather than baptise a whole bunch of them all at once, why don't we space it out? We're here for 3 Sabbaths. We'll have a baptism on every Sabbath. And then sometimes in the evening programs, we'll have small baptisms just as a demonstration for people that come in the evening. But, you know, it's cold up there too because it's the highlands. And so when people get out of the water, what they do is after the baptism, they're kind of standing around and, you know, they put a towel over them. They get them to stand there. It's fine during the day, but at night, if they're standing there, they start to shiver. And so I'm like, yeah, go get changed and then come back. You don't have to stand here shivering. Come on. So yeah, here we are. I was, the first Sabbath, I was baptising without a hat on. That's why my nose is peeling now. But I said, look, is it all right if I wear a cap? They gave me a PNG cap. And so I was baptising in my cap there. The other pastor there that's baptising is a district director. He has 28 organised churches under his care in his district. And I think in that mission, it's called the Eastern Highlands Simbu Mission, I believe that there are something like 24 districts. So he has one of the districts under his care. It was a challenge because there's not enough pastors there for the number of people, not enough pastors for the number of baptisms. And so on the very last Sabbath, I was baptising just by myself. No other local there with me. And so we baptised some 50 something on the last Sabbath. Moving gears now from Revelation 18, which I believe is talking about the final great Pentecost that happens around the world, where the world is lit up with God's glory. I want to come back to Acts chapter 2, where we see the very original Pentecost, where the scriptures tell us in Acts chapter 2 and verse 41, then those who gladly received his word were baptized, and that day about 3,000 souls were added to them. You know, we read that scripture and we think, wow, 3,000 people baptized in one day. It's hard for us to fathom such numbers. And yet, having gone to Papua New Guinea, I can picture it now. I can picture it. After the first Sabbath, as I knew that there was 2,300 sites across the country, we were just one small site. You know, compared to stories that I was hearing, other sites were much bigger than ours. I thought we had about 300 or 400 people. We had up to 1,000 or more. But as I heard what was happening around the country, I estimated that there would be at least 400,000 baptisms after that first one. And I believe that there have been. As of yesterday, the last report that I heard was that there have been more than 278,000 baptisms, and that's with 52% of the sites reporting. So that's barely over half that have reported back. Now, on top of that, there's additional people that have been making decisions, that have been coming forward. See, because they had what they call pre-evangelism meetings. Before we got there, they had a whole series of meetings already at every location at every church they were doing this. They took me around to all their different churches and church plants, and next to each church they built an outdoor little stage and an outdoor area where they could preach. So every church was doing this outside. And so they had their pre-evangelism meetings. Then we got there. We did the PNG for Christ evangelism meetings. Now they've got what they call post-evangelism meetings. So I'm thinking, the old saying that they say, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. People sometimes need to hear 3 times to get it all. And so there must be, on top of what I estimate is 400,000 baptisms, I estimate that there's probably at least another 300,000 that have come forward that want to prepare for baptism. I think it's just amazing. I said to somebody, it's like Pentecost on steroids. Pentecost amplified. There was baptisms of pastors, entire churches becoming Seventh-day Adventist. Church leaders joining. This young man here, on Sunday mornings, I was running these classes with there was no whiteboard, I had a blackboard. And so I was training church members how to give Bible studies, simple Bible studies. And each day I would do a few, and then the following Sunday I would do some more. Well, I didn't know that this guy was there, and he wasn't even a church member. But he had heard that I was doing some training, and so he thought he'd come along. And as he told me his story, he said, I was really impressed that I should attend these public meetings, that I should go. And he's a leader in his church. After the second Sunday that I ran it, he came up to me and he said, do you have this material? Can you give me what you're presenting? And I said, look, I've left it with the district pastor. You can get it from him, but he will continue this training when I'm gone. Anyway, that evening, that same guy, his name is, I called him Ronnie, but it's Ronike. I called him Ronnie. He came forward. You see he's still got that rugby top. What is it? Canterbury, is it? Bulldogs. Canterbury Bulldogs, is it? Yeah. So you can see that he's wearing it under his shirt there. That same evening, he came forward when I made a call for baptism for those people who had not come forward before. And he came forward with his wife there. The next picture over there was after his baptism. This is him. Somebody took a shot that I managed to get. This is him getting out of the pool. He was one of those shivering people that got baptized one evening. All right. But when he came forward, the elders told me, because after every time we made a call for people to come forward, the local church elders would come and they'd get names of people. They'd get their names down, the village that they're from, etc., so that they could follow them up. And the elder told me that night, he said, there wasn't many people that came forward tonight. There was maybe only 15 that night. But he said all of them were young people that the whole district looks up to as leaders. These people are leaders. And by the people seeing these people come up, it's a big statement for everyone that's watching these people come up. The Bible says that they gladly received the word. And there was many calls for decisions. I called for various decisions, discipleship. I called for people to be Bible workers, trainers, pastors even. I really believe that between, in the next year or so, there will probably be more than 1 million Seventh-day Adventists in Papua New Guinea. One story that I heard was of a pastor. I don't know which denomination it was. He was there and his son had gone forward making a decision to be baptised. And the father, who was a pastor, sitting next to his wife, was crying as he sees that his son goes forward. And the wife eventually says, "What are you crying for? You go up and you go get baptised too." So, interesting story. I'm sure there's many stories that we haven't heard. I'm hoping that somehow we can stay in touch with the people over there so they tell us more of people's stories. In Acts 2, verse 42, we see how people spend their time. We read, "And they continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine and fellowship, in the breaking of bread and in prayers." I didn't know exactly how to draw it, so I just drew it with my finger on my phone and then took a screenshot. But you see here where the two yellow churches are. They're the two original Seventh-day Adventist churches in the area. The red line is the road that comes through, and the red dot is kind of the centre of town where the market is, and the bus stops are. People get, travelling to different places, that's where they come. It's called a station. The place is called Henganofi Station, and there's various villages, off to the side from there. The blue one, of course, that's the river that's going through town. And the green dots are the small groups that began when COVID came along. When the government said you can't meet in your churches, our church leaders said, okay, we break the church up into small groups. You meet outdoors near where you live. Those small groups today are church plants. One of them has 80 people coming along every Sabbath, just over the last 4 years. Another one, from the smallest to the largest one had about 15, the largest about 80. But people fellowship together. They love spending time together. They obviously prayed together in the years leading up to what we witnessed. They share food together every Sabbath. As they took me around to some of these different sites, I noticed that next to their church, they had growing banana trees, of course. They had a plantation of pineapples. They had orange trees, fully grown orange trees next to some of them, all sorts of different fruits. So I said, so when you have your Sabbath lunch, you just go and rip up a pineapple. I said, yeah, that's exactly what we do. That's what the pineapples are there for. They're for Sabbath lunch, And so people love spending time together just as they did in the book of Acts. And in doctrine, they have these world changer Bibles. I'm not sure if you've seen them. They're like a white Bible with a blue globe on it, blue and green. And hundreds of thousands of these Bibles have been distributed across the Pacific. Most of them that I saw are worn out. They've been used so much. They're a hardcover Bible, small Bible, but people are using them. We need more of them. We need 500,000 more of them to be printed and shipped over there. I said, all these people that are getting baptised, do they even have Bibles at home? Some of them don't. So I challenged the people. I said, if you have a second or a third Bible at home, give it to the new people. We need Bibles for the people. So that's a big project that I'm sure that we could be helping out with. So these small groups are now churches, and I think it's just amazing how God has blessed them. In verse 43 we read, "Then fear came upon every soul, and many wonders and signs were done through the apostles." Andrew, where do I start with miracles? Obviously, people making decisions for Jesus is a miracle itself, isn't it? A changed heart is the biggest miracle that we see. A conversion, that is the biggest miracle. Geraldine had come up with these little short health talks that people were able to do. Some places did them, some places didn't do them. But I just heard yesterday there was one man, Steve, who was an old classmate of mine in Avondale. He did the health talks himself. And towards the end of the health talks, there was one on forgiveness. And he said after that, he said 2 groups of people, 2 clans in that area who had been fighting with each other for many years, decades, they came together and they reconciled. That's a miracle, isn't it? That's a miracle. But, there were ministering angels, and I think, Andrew, you probably shared a little bit about that. Did you this morning? Forthcoming sermon. But, there were angels that people saw that came to the rescue of people in their time of need. There were healings. You remember just a month ago, there were all of these doctors and health professionals here at our church in Wallara, right? They were heading off to the mega health clinic. Yeah, and Solomon was there. Solomon's a nurse, right? You have a specialty in nursing? Surgical. Yeah, that's why he was there. One of the best eye surgeons was there, an Adventist guy from India who can do a cataract surgery in 2 minutes. 2 minutes. There's obviously a lot of prep time and equipment that is needed, etc. But the actual work that he does on the eye, 2 minutes. Cost you thousands of dollars to get it done here in Australia. He was doing it free over there. And not just for the time of 5 days of the mega health clinic. He decided he would stay on for the evangelistic programs and continue every day to do these eye operations. Well, people would come from all over Papua New Guinea because they heard that these free eye operations were being done for cataracts. So they would just turn up, they'd get their eyes done, they could see again. But eventually, I don't know why he stopped. Maybe his equipment ran out. Maybe he just had to go home. But, you have to call it a day at some stage. There was no more operations, but there was more people lining up. And God did a miracle. All of these people that were lined up for the surgery, God healed their eyes. And they could see without surgery. Isn't that amazing? By faith, people were healed. One of the speakers there, she got quite sick, and they prayed over her with oil, and she was able to preach again the next day. But she said, look, I feel a lot better. Eventually she had to go home a few days later. But she says, I have this other problem. She said, for many years I've had a back problem and I spend $150 a week on my back. Do you think you could pray over that as well? They prayed again, and she said that evening, I felt like this gentle massage in my back. And then the next day it was gone. God did amazing things for people in Papua New Guinea. There was another place where a young man came to the preaching site and he's making fun of the preacher, going, maybe making out that he's a preacher. I don't know what he was doing. But then he fell over. He breathed 3 times and died. It reminds me of the story of Elisha, with the children making fun of Elisha. After his death, all of the people in the area thought, wow, what is this that's going on? And they began to flock to the meetings. At my site here, this was the banner that they put up at the site, but earlier along the road, maybe 150 metres earlier, right there where the bus station is, they had another banner with my picture on it, and various other preachers in nearby sites were on there. And they said one night there was a man there. They said, people said, we believe it was Jesus. Jesus was there pointing us to go to the meetings. He said, we've never seen this guy before, but he was pointing at the sign saying, go to the meetings, go to the meetings. There's just all these supernatural things happening in various places. We're obviously preaching in English. They didn't want to provide us translators, but people said they could hear it in their own language. They could hear it in their own language. So God provided the gift of understanding, or the gift of tongues, whatever you want to call it. There was signs in the heavens, different glows and things like that, glows and things happening above the preaching stage. On the very last day when I was baptizing, I wasn't aware of this, but people took pictures of the sun. There was like a big rainbow thing around the sun just during the baptism time. And so, people over there just in tune with things like that are going on that we maybe don't even think about too much. Going on to Acts 2, verses 44 and 45, we read, "Now all who believed were together and had all things in common, and they would sell or sold their possessions and goods, and they divided or distributed them among all as anyone had need." I can't believe that for such poor people, they are all subsistence farmers. They just grow their own food, they sell what they can, they don't have much. But they gave what they could, and they built these stages for us to preach from. They built new houses. Many places had new houses. So where we stayed, there was a new house. Even had a flushing toilet. It's amazing for Papua New Guinea in the middle of nowhere. New churches, they took me around one time to these different places. You see on the bottom left-hand side, that's their newest church plant. It's only been there for about a year or so. They meet under that little shelter there with a blue tarpaulin over it. But you see in the bags there, they've been collecting rocks from the river so that they can make some concrete one day. When they save up some money for some cement and some materials, they'll start to build a proper church. A lot of these new church plants you can see just have very basic sort of seating there, just an earthen floor, no concrete floor. And most of these places are full. And so they need to knock down a wall and make it longer. Particularly after this program, some of these places will double in number of people attending. One of the churches I had to cross this river to get to. And they've got various, banana tree trunks and stuff that are just barely floating on the river there. You got to walk across to get there. I said to them, "What do you do in the wet season? How do you get to church and back?" And they said, "Oh, we swim." And they said, "We can all swim because we live in this area." But he says, when the mountain people come down, they can't swim. And so we have to carry them on our back and we swim across. The one on the top right-hand side, that's pretty much how they build their churches. It's just a concrete slab. They put up a wooden frame with wood that is donated from church members from their land, and then they have to buy the steel sheeting and some insulation and things like that for their churches. That church there on the top right-hand side was probably the largest of these church plants, and has about 80 people that attend it. And so I said, well, the established churches have about seating capacity of about 80. So I said, how come you guys are still called a sub-branch church or like a church plant? What do you have to do in order to be an organised church? And they said, in order to be an organised church, you have to have sub-branches under you. Which means most of our churches in Australia would not be recognised as churches in Papua New Guinea. Because unless our church is supporting a new church, in Papua New Guinea you can't be a church. Does that make sense? That means that we would take our elder or one of our elders and a few members, send them out somewhere, start a church. If you've got about 3 or 4 or 5 of these happening, then you can be a church. That's how they operate. Isn't that amazing? So we can learn a lot from them. They give, they share, they contribute. They want to reach people that are unreached. There was behind where I was living, there was like a mountain, and I saw a waterfall there. I said, hey, it'd be nice if we have some spare time. It'd be nice to walk to the waterfall. How far is it? They said, oh, it's about 2 hours each way. In the end, we didn't go. We didn't have enough time. But I learned about 2 days before finishing the reason why my site was live streaming. They were live streaming to Facebook. They were not getting many views, maybe 10, 20, 30, 40. The reason they were doing it is because over the mountain there's a village. And the village over there was receiving the signal and rebroadcasting on a big screen for their village. If I'd known that, I would have tried to take a day out and walk across that mountain to see these people. In terms of giving and sharing, a couple of days before we left, they got me to come and speak at one of the village corners right near where we were staying. And they asked for special prayer for their village. This is them there actually. They asked for special prayer for their village, for spiritualism, which is creeping into their homes. As people step back from their Christian faiths, spiritualism comes in as it was in the days of old. And so they recognise this, and they wanted me to pray for their young people. They grow marijuana freely in their backyards. You know, it's just, there's a marijuana plant. You know what I'm saying? And so they've got drug issues and things like that. And so when people are away from their churches, they start doing things that are harmful to them. But what shocked me the most is when I came there, and they were all kind of 7 o'clock in the morning, they got me to speak to them. They were all dancing around. It means that they're happy, right? They're doing these high-pitched squeals and stuff. It means that they're happy. And at the end of it, they gave me some of those bags. They call them billums. And they said, there's a little gift in there for you. When I got home, I pulled out, they had collected, from that little village, they had collected almost 800 kina, which is almost $400 Australian. They would be highly offended if I just gave it back to them. So I ended up keeping that money and spending it in a different way, but I took a whole bunch of Australian money and gave it back to the church to use in that area for health work, because Geraldine managed to train a whole lot of our ambassadors, like our video was about today, and they're going to have ongoing programs there. So that money we've put back into the health work in that area. But verse 46 says, so continuing daily with one accord in the temple and breaking bread from house to house, they ate their food with gladness and simplicity of heart. Many people over there have a deep faith in God. If not, like I said, they become overwhelmed by spiritualistic practices in their villages, in their homes. Verse 47 says, praising God and having favour with all the people, and the Lord added to the church daily those who were being saved. I think Andrew already mentioned people were willing to come and sit and listen and even sit in the rain. Sit in the rain listening to the programs. We were blessed in our area because there was just light showers. It wasn't strong rain. I'm just looking at the time. I see people are leaving. I'm preaching too long, you see. That's the problem when you don't write a proper sermon, you just kind of speak, right? People were willing to volunteer their time. They cooked for us, they cleaned, they washed our clothes, they organised our schedules. We had security people around us. One time we tried to get away and just walk down the road. Before you know it, there's a security guy walking behind us, you know. They were onto it all the time, making sure everything ran smoothly. And, they have so little, and yet they do so much. And as I'm thinking about it, what can we do? I think we can do more, can't we? We can do more. These people were willing to put their farms on hold, to put their growing on hold, to make the programs work. Sometimes we don't come to programs that we run at the church or even in the community because we say, oh, I've heard that before. It's not for us. It's for the community. It's for people out there. And yet, you know, I learn myself. Every time I run something like this, I learn myself. So as I said earlier, comfort is our addiction. Isn't it true? Comfort is our addiction. And, you know, amazingly, like I said, I learned something new as I was preparing for one of the nightly programs. The verse here in Revelation 14:12 took on a new significance for me. I saw it in a new light. We read in Revelation 14:12, here is the patience of the saints. Here is the, you could say, steadfastness or steadfast perseverance of the saints. Here are those who keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. As I thought about some of the things I've been preaching about and the situation around us in the world globally, I thought about the four horsemen and the downfall of the early church and then the coming back up through the Reformation. Then I started to think about the post-Reformation. What's happening in the world today? And as we understand it, there'll be a falling away again. And, you know, the Protestant churches in general will accept error. And that's why Revelation refers to them as Babylon, as confusion, bringing in all these things. And so I wrote to a friend of mine, an academic who's doing a PhD, and we spoke about cycles of faith throughout time, where people are drawn away from the truth of God to a feelings-based religion. Did you get that? A feelings-based religion. And it's happened throughout time. God creates mankind in Eden, and everything is perfect until the downfall at the tree. And Eve wants to be like God. She has this feeling of like, you know, I want something more than what I've got. I want this feeling, and it brings a downfall. Thankfully, we had the future hope in the coming Messiah. Post-Eden, again, the world fell into idolatry, into a false worship experience. And God had to bring the flood. And there was a reboot, if you like, with Noah's family. Then afterwards, we see post-flood that, again, people are drawn away from a faith in God to idolatry again and a false worship at Babel. And God has to disperse the nations. Then we see at the Exodus, God brings people out wanting them to follow him in truth. And not long after, what happens? They bring in the golden calf, false worship. And the result is 40 years wilderness. And only a new generation can go through. Then we see Joshua's stand saying, you know, me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. But over the years, Israel falls away into idolatry and false worship. And eventually they are taken captive into Babylon. And only years later can come back and rebuild Jerusalem. Then after Nehemiah's generation, there's a slide again, but this time towards legalism and formalism. So when Jesus comes, there's like this us and them sort of thing, and yet Jesus wants to bring all people together, and he's got a message for all people. And when I saw these swings, if you like, throughout history, of truth and falling away from truth, truth and falling away from truth, truth and going after a feelings-based religion. Do you understand what I'm saying? People want to follow something where they feel good, you know. That's what's happening around us today. We see that from the apostles' time, you have the four horsemen, and the church goes towards a feeling-based religion, and that's how today we have the Roman Catholic Church. Because they brought in various mystical practices into the church that might feel good. And people are drawn towards this mystical sort of worship. God turns it around in the Reformation time, and you got different leaders coming along, and so that's why we have so many different faiths around us today, different leaders bringing up different truths. And then eventually you have Adventists coming along and bringing in the Sabbath truth, the second coming, the sanctuary, the state of the dead, etc. But today we live in what I believe a post-Reformation time, where people again are tending towards wanting to follow a feelings-based religion. And so we see things that have come in the area of worship, in the area of tongues, feelings, ideas about a secret coming, and eventually, according to Revelation 18, demonic activity, spiritualism in the church. And that's why the cry, this loud cry, this final cry in Revelation 18 is one that will light up the whole world. A global Pentecost saying, "Come out of her, my people." Friends, as I considered all of that verse that talks about the patience of the saints took on a new meaning. The patience of the saints. At a time when Christians and Adventists are looking to Eastern practices and Eastern religions and trying to bring in elements of that into the Christian faith. At a time when people are putting feelings over biblical truth. At a time when we are on the knife edge of eternity. At a time when people are drawn to mega churches, which seemingly seem to grow and mushroom overnight. God is calling his people to have the patience of the saints. Hold fast what you have. Beware, Jesus said, take heed that no one deceives you. Be ready, Jesus said. Be in a state of readiness. Don't just get ready, but stay ready. Be ready and stay ready, because Pentecost is set to be repeated. Isaiah says, I will do a new thing. I will do a new thing. Not just PNG, but around the world. Today, we have no need to take 2-hour-long ice baths. We don't need 2-hour ice baths. We need to be soaking in the Word of God. We need to be prayerful. We need to be witnessing as God gives opportunities. We need to be praying for those opportunities. And so today, Jesus is calling for his children to come, to commit, to be ready, to stand for him, to be a witness for him, to not waver. And as we think of the times that we're living in, Jesus said, remember Lot's wife. Why did he say, remember Lot's wife? Remember Lot's wife. When it's time to make a decision, don't waver. Step forward. Choose to be on the right side. Make a stand for Jesus. Make a stand. Be baptized. If you haven't done so yet, make a stand to be a faithful witness. How many of you today want to say, Lord, I want to stand, not just be ready, but to stay ready? Yeah? Will you stand with me as we close with prayer? Stand and be ready and stay ready, that when God brings Pentecost to our part of the world, we will not be left behind. Let's pray. Father in heaven, Lord, it's been a long message today, but there's so many amazing things that you've been doing, and it's hard not to share. I pray, Lord, that you will bless the churches in PNG as they grapple with the numbers where the church has doubled in size overnight. I pray, Lord, that you'll give them wisdom, help them to remain faithful, help them to be in the Word. And Lord, I pray for our churches here in Australia as well, that we may be ready and that we may see what's happening around us in the world, that we may hold fast. We have the right message. We have our identity in you. Help us not to waver and look to maybe where things may seem more rosy, where perhaps churches are growing and attracting large numbers of people. Help us to stay in your word, to be patient, as your word calls us to be patient, so that when the time comes, we may be ready, we may be prepared, because we have done the groundwork. We pray for your blessing, not only on us, but on our families and on all that we know, our sphere of influence around us. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.